In 1958, a graduate student from the University of Tennessee drove into Harlan County to complete a land use survey for his thesis. He made it 4 miles down a ridge road before a truck blocked the path. 2 men stepped out. They said nothing. They simply stood there until he turned around. His thesis was submitted without that section. The gap is still visible in the final document held at the university library. No footnote explains it. In the Appalachian Mountains, there are places that do not appear on current maps despite appearing on older ones. Places where the paper trail simply ends. Where federal language repeats itself in ways that raise questions no agency has chosen to answer. Where the people who live closest say the least. We are counting down 6 isolated Appalachian hollows surrounded by unanswered questions and asking what exactly has been kept from record for so long. Number 6, Greasy Creek Hollow, Pike County, Kentucky. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flagged this drainage in 1969 during a flood control survey of the Big Sandy River watershed. The recommendation in that survey was that Greasy Creek Hollow be excluded from any future development corridor. The justification given was soil instability. Here is what that language does not account for. A Pike County deed researcher named Myra Stidham spent 14 months in 2004 and 2005 combing property records in that drainage. She found something the Corps report did not mention. Every parcel in the upper hollow had transferred to a single unnamed trust between 1966 and 1968. The transfers happened in sequence, quietly, over a span of 22 months. Stidham published her findings in a small regional journal. She noted that the trust name appeared in no Kentucky corporate registry she could locate. It has never been located since. There's an older detail. A 1934 Works Progress Administration field report on rural housing conditions in Pike County includes a 2-page description of a settlement at the head of Greasy Creek. The report names 11 structures. By the time the Corps survey was conducted 35 years later, none of those structures are referenced. Not as demolished, not as abandoned, not as anything. The settlement simply does not appear in the Corps document. The discrepancy between those 2 records has never been formally addressed by any agency. A road still runs into the lower drainage. It ends at a cable stretched between 2 oak trees. The cable carries no sign. There is no posted authority. There is simply the cable, and beyond it, the hollow runs north and narrows and goes quiet in a way that feels less like wilderness and more like privacy. That is only number 6. Number 5, Sung Branch Hollow, Dickinson County, Virginia. There is no closure order on Sung Branch. There has never been one. What there is instead is a county surveyor's note from 1921, discovered during a courthouse records audit in 1997, in which the surveyor, a man named Walter Bourne, wrote that he had been advised by 3 separate landowners on the ridge above the hollow that the branch was not to be run. He used that exact phrase, not to be run. He did not run it. His survey of the surrounding land proceeds normally, then skips the drainage entirely, then continues on the other side as if nothing had been omitted. Bourne filed no explanation. The note explaining his decision is written in the margin of the survey form, in smaller handwriting than the rest of the document, as if he added it later, as if he wanted the record to show that he knew what he had left out. A Dickinson County historian named Gerald Owens spent 6 years trying to understand who told Bourne to stop and why. He interviewed descendants of the 3 families whose names appear in adjacent deed records. 2 families declined to speak. One gave him 20 minutes and told him only this, that the decision about Sung Branch had been made before anyone currently living was born, and that it was not a decision anyone currently living had any intention of revisiting. Owens published his research in 2014. He described the conversation as the clearest non-answer he had ever received. He also noted that the families who declined to speak did so without hostility, without legal threat, and without apparent discomfort. They simply declined in the way that a person declines to discuss something that is not a secret, but is also not available to strangers. Sung Branch Hollow still does not appear in any county land use plan. It appears on the 1921 survey only as a gap. Number 4, Puckett Cove Hollow, Yancey County, North Carolina. In 1943, the War Department acquired approximately 2,800 acres of ridge and cove land in Yancey County under Emergency Wartime Land Authority. The stated purpose was timber resource assessment for wartime manufacturing needs. 38 people were relocated from Puckett Cove. Relocation payments were made. The records of those payments are held at the National Archives in Atlanta. Here is what those records show. The payments were processed. The families left. And then nothing happened. No timber was harvested. No manufacturing operation was established. No wartime use of any kind is documented in any subsequent federal record related to that acreage. The land sat under federal control throughout the war and was quietly transferred to the Forest Service in 1949 under a routine land consolidation order. A researcher named Dr. Thomas Ballard at Appalachian State University spent 4 years in the late 1990s trying to understand what the War Department had actually intended to do with Puckett Cove. He filed 11 Freedom of Information requests. 7 were returned with partial redactions. 4 were returned with a notation that the relevant records could not be located. The Forest Service currently lists the cove as a restricted research natural area. The restriction has been in place since 1952. The original research designation paperwork, which would name the purpose of the restriction, is listed in the Forest Service's own index as present but unavailable for review. Dr. Ballard's conclusion, published in 2001, was careful and precise. He wrote that he could not determine why the hollow was acquired, why it was never used for its stated purpose, or why the restriction placed on it in 1952 remained in effect 50 years later. He called it a sequence of decisions without a traceable decision-maker. Stand at the ridgeline above Puckett Cove on a cold morning in March, and you can see the drainage all the way to the valley floor. It is a quiet, intact cove, the kind of place that looks like it has simply been left alone. 38 people were removed from that ground. Whatever the reason was, it has never been written down anywhere that anyone has been permitted to read. Number 3, Dry Fork Hollow, McDowell County, West Virginia. The earliest known reference to a restriction on Dry Fork Hollow appears in a letter written in 1903 by a Methodist circuit preacher named Elias Compton. Compton traveled the ridges of McDowell County twice a year for 31 years. His letters, donated to the West Virginia State Archives by his descendants in 1961, describe in detail the communities he visited, the families he knew, the terrain he crossed. In a letter dated October 1903, Compton writes that he had been told by a family on the ridge above Dry Fork that he should not continue down into the hollow. He describes the family as serious and sincere. He writes that he had no reason to doubt them, and every reason to respect the kind of knowledge people carry in these hills when they offer it without explanation. He turned back. He never returned to that section of his route. Compton's letters were studied by a West Virginia University folklorist named Dr. Agnes Wren in the 1980s. She identified 14 other passages in his 31 years of correspondence in which Compton described being told not to enter a specific location. Dry Fork was the only one where he offered no follow-up, no later inquiry, no mention of the place again for the remaining 11 years of his circuit riding, as if he had decided after that single afternoon on the ridge that whatever was in that hollow was not his to know. The 1910 federal census records 2 households in Dry Fork Hollow with a combined population of 9 people. The 1920 census records no households, no death records, no relocation assistance records, no departure of any kind appears in the McDowell County Archive for any of those 9 individuals. Dr. Wren noted this in her research. She did not speculate. She simply recorded it. 9 people documented in 1910. No documentation of any kind after that. She ended her chapter on Dry Fork with one sentence. The record does not account for them. Number 2, Fodderstack Branch, Breathitt County, Kentucky. Breathitt County has a reputation in Kentucky history that most people who know it are reluctant to discuss, and those who don't know it tend to find difficult to believe. In the decades between 1865 and 1915, it recorded more documented killings per capita than any county in the United States. It was called bloody breathed it in newspapers across the country. The feuds that ran through it were not romantic or mythological. They were specific, generational, and ruthlessly documented in court records that still exist. Foderstag Branch sits at the headwaters of one of the drainage systems that runs out of the most contested land in that county's history. A 1908 circuit court record references a boundary dispute over the branch that was withdrawn before any ruling was entered. The attorney who filed the withdrawal submitted no explanation. The opposing attorney filed no objection. The case simply disappeared from the docket on a Tuesday in November 1908 and was not mentioned again in any subsequent court record. A legal historian named Cora Mead at the University of Kentucky identified this withdrawal in 2006 while researching Breathitt County land disputes. She described it as anomalous. In 30 years of studying Appalachian land law, she said she had never seen a contested boundary case withdrawn without notation by both parties. The standard practice was to explain. Someone always explained. Here, no one did. The current land status of Foderstag Branch is listed in county records as undivided interest held in common. The names listed as interest holders include two family surnames last recorded in county records in 1917. No legal process has ever resolved or updated that designation. The land exists in a category that county offices acknowledge but cannot administer. It belongs on paper to people who may not exist anymore, and no one has gone to court to change that in over 100 years. There is a gravel road that runs within half a mile of the branch head. It ends at a farmstead. The family that lives there has lived there for 4 generations. When a county land records researcher visited in 2009 to ask about the hollow, the woman who answered the door listened to his question, looked at him for a long moment, and said simply, "That's not land anyone needs to go into." She closed the door. He left. He noted in his report that she had not been threatening. She had been, in his words, entirely matter of fact, as if the answer was obvious to anyone with sense, and he was simply the latest person to require explained. Number 1. The unnamed drainage, Letcher County, Kentucky. A federal land survey conducted in 1887 by a team working along the Kentucky-Virginia border recorded a drainage in Letcher County with a local name, given by residents, spelled phonetically by the surveyor in the margin of his field notebook. That notebook is held at the Library of Congress in the American Memory Collection. The name is legible. The drainage does not appear on any survey produced after 1901. Not closed, not reclassified, not noted as merged with another designation. It simply ceases to be recorded, and no document held in any archive that researchers have accessed explains why. A historian named Dr. Samuel Vance spent the better part of 2 years between 2012 and 2014 trying to reconstruct what had happened. He found the 1887 survey. He found a partial reference in an 1898 county tax ledger that suggested residents were still present. He found nothing after that. No departure. No death records consistent with the household sizes implied by the tax record. No record of the name being retired or changed. No interagency memo recommending the drainage be dropped from subsequent surveys. He drove to Letcher County. He spoke to 8 people in the area near the coordinates. 6 said they were unfamiliar with the drainage by either its old name or its approximate location. 2 recognized the coordinates when he showed them on a topographic printout. Both of those conversations, he wrote afterward, ended the same way. A pause, a careful look at him, and then a version of the same answer. Some places just get left. He asked both of them, separately, days apart, when that decision had been made. Neither answered. He sat with the silence both times. He described those 2 silences in his research notes as unlike any he had experienced in 30 years of fieldwork. Not hostile, not evasive in the ordinary sense. Something older than evasion. A silence that did not feel like withholding so much as like the simple, settled fact that there was nothing to say to him that would mean anything to him. That whatever had happened in that drainage, and whatever understanding had grown up around it in the century since, lived entirely outside the kind of language that gets written into surveys and filed in archives and explained to strangers who arrive with printed coordinates and academic credentials. The land exists. The coordinates are real. The 1887 notebook is in the Library of Congress, and anyone can read it. What comes after that page is 120 years of nothing, held in place by something no document has ever named. Appalachia is a place with more than its share of genuine, ordinary silences. Communities that emptied out slowly over generations because the coal ran out or the jobs went elsewhere or the young left for cities and didn't come back. Most of the hollows in these mountains that appear in old surveys and not in new ones are empty for reasons that are sad and mundane and perfectly well understood. But there's a category that sits apart from those. Places where the absence is not an oversight, where the records were not lost, but were not kept, where the people who live closest are not ignorant of what lies nearby, but are simply deliberately across generations, unwilling to discuss it, where the silence is not a void, but a choice, and where the researchers who get closest to an answer come back with the same description of the same kind of silence. Not frightening, not threatening, simply settled. As if whatever is being held in those hollows was decided on long ago by people who knew exactly what they were doing, and the decision is held because everyone since has understood, without needing to be told twice, that it was the right one. The difference between a hollow that went quiet and a hollow that chose to stay quiet is the only question that matters in any of these cases. After all the surveys, the FOIA requests, the courthouse searches, the ridgeline drives, and the careful interviews, and the published research that goes right up to the edge and stops, no one has answered it. What do you think is in these places? Leave in the comments. Because the researchers who have spent years looking haven't come to an agreement, and the people who live there aren't saying.